The rain hammered against the diner's greasy windows like 1,000 tiny fists, each droplet catching the neon glow of the open 24 hours sign and turning it into something that looked almost beautiful. Almost. But nothing in this part of town stayed beautiful for long. I wiped down the same spot on the counter for the third time, my worn cloth leaving streaks instead of cleaning them, my fingers pruned from hours of dishwater and coffee spills. It was nearly midnight, and the diner smelled like burnt coffee, old grease, and the desperation that clung to everyone who walked through those doors at this hour. My feet ached in my cheap sneakers, the ones with the sole starting to peel away from the canvas. I'd been on shift since 2 in the afternoon, pulling a double because Sarah called in sick again, and my manager Jerry didn't care that I'd already worked 6 days straight. He just grunted and told me table 4 needed more ketchup. I was invisible here. Just another waitress in a stained apron. Another tired face serving eggs and bacon to truckers and insomniacs, who never really looked at me. They looked through me, past me, around me. I was 23 years old, and I felt ancient. My dreams of art school and a different life buried under student debt I'd never be able to pay and rent, that came due every month like clockwork. The bell above the door chimed, letting in a gust of wet wind that made me shiver. I didn't look up immediately. I'd learned not to seem too eager, too desperate for tips. But something made the air in the diner change. It got heavier somehow, thicker, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. When I finally glanced toward the door, I saw him. He didn't belong here. That was my first thought. He wore a black coat that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, the fabric so fine it seemed to repel the rain rather than absorb it. Water beaded on his shoulders like diamonds. His shoes, polished leather that clicked against the cracked linoleum, reflected the fluorescent lights as he moved. But it wasn't his clothes that made my breath catch. It was the way he carried himself, like he owned not just the room, but the very air we breathed. 2 men flanked him, both built like brick walls, their eyes constantly scanning the diner's interior. One touched his ear, an earpiece, I realized, and murmured something too low to hear. The man in the middle didn't look at them. He didn't need to. They moved around him like satellites orbiting a planet, and I understood in that moment that I was looking at someone dangerous. His face was all sharp angles, and dark eyes that seemed to catch and hold the light in a way that made my stomach twist. Not old, maybe late 30s, with the kind of presence that made everyone in the diner suddenly find their coffee cups fascinating. Even Jerry, who never shut up, went quiet behind the grill. I should have looked away. Should have focused on wiping down my section, on refilling the sugar dispensers, on anything but him. But I couldn't. And then those dark eyes found mine across the diner, and I felt pinned, like a butterfly under glass. He moved toward the counter, toward me, and I could smell him as he got closer. Expensive cologne, something with notes of cedar and smoke, mixing with the rain on his coat. It didn't belong with the smell of burnt coffee and old grease. Nothing about him belonged here. "Coffee," he said, his voice low and rough, with an accent that rolled the vowels in a way that made the simple word sound like a command. Italian, I thought. Black. My hands shook as I reached for the pot, and I hated myself for it. I'd served hundreds of customers, thousands maybe. But none of them had made my pulse race like this, made me feel like I was standing too close to a fire. I poured the coffee, trying not to slosh it over the rim of the cup. He didn't sit. Just stood there, one hand in his pocket, watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. His men positioned themselves near the windows, their backs to us but their attention everywhere. "Rough night?" he asked, and I nearly dropped the coffee pot. "They're all rough," I said before I could stop myself, then bit my lip. Don't talk back. Don't be memorable. But when I risked a glance at his face, I thought I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. "You work too much," he observed, his eyes traveling over my stained apron, my tired face. It wasn't a question. "Bills don't pay themselves." He pulled out his wallet, sleek black leather, the kind that probably had a designer name I couldn't pronounce, and placed a $100 bill on the counter for a $3 cup of coffee. "I don't have change for that," I said, even though my fingers itched to take it. $100 would mean I could actually buy groceries this week instead of surviving on diner leftovers and ramen. "Keep it." I can't. You can. His tone left no room for argument, and something in his eyes made me understand that refusing would be more dangerous than accepting. So I took the bill with trembling fingers and shoved it in my apron pocket, my face burning. He took a sip of the coffee, and I waited for him to grimace at how terrible it was, but he just nodded slightly. One of his men murmured something, touching his earpiece again, and the dangerous man's expression hardened in a way that made my blood run cold. Problem? I asked without thinking, and immediately wanted to take it back. Don't ask questions. Don't get involved. But he looked at me again, really looked at me, like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. Always, he said softly, then set the cup down. He turned to leave, his men moving with him like a well-choreographed dance. They were almost at the door when I heard it. A small, pathetic sound that didn't belong to the rumble of thunder or the drum of rain, a whimper. A child's whimper. I moved without thinking, slipping out from behind the counter and peering through the streaked window. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the parking lot into a small lake, and there, huddled beside a black SUV with tinted windows, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old, wearing a soaked pink dress that clung to her tiny frame. Her dark hair was plastered to her head, and she was shaking so violently I could see it even from inside. Her lips looked blue in the neon light, and her eyes, wide and terrified, stared at nothing. "Oh my God!" I breathed. The dangerous man and his guards were already outside, not seeing her, moving toward a different vehicle, a black Mercedes with windows so dark they looked like obsidian. They were leaving. They were leaving, and that little girl was going to freeze to death in the rain. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I grabbed my phone from my apron pocket, my hands shaking as I fumbled with it. The expensive car, the guards, the way everyone in the diner had gone quiet. This man was someone important, someone powerful, and that little girl was beside his SUV. I ran to the door, shoving it open and letting the rain hit me like a slap. "Wait!" I screamed, but my voice was lost in the thunder and the downpour. The Mercedes was already pulling away, its taillights bleeding red into the darkness. The little girl's eyes found mine, and I saw her lips moving, trying to form words that wouldn't come. She was in shock, I realized with growing horror, severe shock, and she was alone. I ran back inside, water streaming from my hair and clothes, my sneakers squelching on the floor. Jerry was yelling something at me about tracking water everywhere, but I ignored him. I grabbed the diner's phone, the landline that still worked when cell service got spotty, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. There was a business card on the counter, black and expensive looking with gold lettering. The dangerous man must have left it when he paid. There was no name, just a phone number with an Italian country code and a symbol, a lion with a crown. I didn't think. Didn't pause to consider what I was doing, or what it might mean. I just dialed the number with trembling fingers, listening to it ring once, twice, 3 times. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "See?" A male voice, sharp and suspicious. "There's a little girl," I said, my voice breaking. "Outside the diner. Your diner, the one you just left. She's shivering in the rain and she can't speak, and I think she's in shock and I don't know what to do." The line went dead silent for 3 long heartbeats. Then, "Don't move. Don't touch her. We're coming back." The call ended with a click that sounded like a gunshot in my ear. I dropped the phone and ran back outside, not caring about the rain or Jerry's shouting or anything except that little girl huddled in the darkness. I crouched beside her, not touching. He'd said don't touch, but close enough to shield her from the worst of the wind. "It's okay," I whispered, even though I had no idea if it was. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay." Her eyes locked onto mine, dark and empty, and so scared. And I knew, in that moment, that I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, or maybe the biggest decision. The rain hammered down harder, turning the night into a watercolor painting of darkness and neon. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the scream of tires on wet pavement, getting closer, getting closer. The Mercedes materialized out of the rain, like something from a nightmare, its headlights cutting through the downpour with an intensity that made me squint. It wasn't alone. 2 more black SUVs flanked it, moving in perfect formation, their tires spraying water as they screeched into the parking lot. The diner's neon signs reflected off their dark windows, turning them into moving mirrors of red and blue light. I stayed crouched beside the little girl, my body instinctively curving around her even though I wasn't touching her. The rain had soaked through my uniform completely now, the thin fabric clinging to my skin, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones. But the child was colder, so much colder. Her shivering had become weaker, more sporadic, and that terrified me more than the violent trembling. Car doors opened before the vehicles had fully stopped. The dangerous man emerged from the Mercedes like a force of nature, his coat billowing behind him. And I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen in the diner, raw, unfiltered fear. It transformed him, made him look more human and somehow more terrifying all at once. "Julia!" The word ripped from his throat, and suddenly he was running, actually running, his polished shoes splashing through puddles as his men scrambled to keep up. He dropped to his knees in the water beside us with no regard for his expensive clothes, and his hands, large, scarred hands that I instinctively knew had done terrible things, reached for the little girl with a gentleness that made my chest ache. "Piccola mia, oh God, piccola mia," he murmured, lifting her into his arms. She made a small sound, barely human, and her tiny hands clutched at his coat with what little strength she had left. "How long has she been out here? How long?" His eyes found mine, and the intensity in them made me flinch. Up close, I could see they were almost black, with flecks of gold that caught the light like embers in a dying fire. There was murder in those eyes, and desperation, and something else I couldn't name. "I don't know," I gasped, my teeth starting to chatter. "I just saw her when you were leaving. She was just sitting there, and she won't talk, and I didn't know what else to do. You called me." He said it like he couldn't quite believe it, even as he was pulling off his coat and wrapping it around the child. It swallowed her completely, and I could see her face disappearing into the expensive fabric. "You called me instead of the police." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "The card. You left a card, and I thought maybe she was yours, or someone you knew, and she's mine." The words were flat, final, and filled with so much pain that I felt it like a physical blow. "She's my daughter." One of his men, the larger one, with a scar running down his cheek, appeared at his side with a silver thermal blanket. They moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping it around the coat, around the little girl who still wasn't speaking. Her eyes were closed now, and that seemed worse somehow. "Hospital!" The dangerous man barked, and immediately his men were moving, one of them speaking rapidly into a phone in Italian, words I couldn't understand but that sounded urgent and commanding. "Get Dr. Russo. Tell him we're coming in through the private entrance. No one sees her. No one." He stood, cradling his daughter against his chest like she weighed nothing, and those dark eyes fixed on me again. I was shivering violently now, my lips probably as blue as his daughter's had been, and I watched water drip from my hair onto the pavement. "You're coming with us," he said. "What? No, I can't. I have to work. My shift isn't now." The command in his voice made it clear this wasn't a request. One of his men, not the scarred one, another with cold blue eyes, was already moving toward me, his hand reaching for my arm. "Wait." I tried to step back, but my legs were shaking too badly. "I don't even know you. I don't know who you are or Marco Salvatore." He said it like it should mean something, like those 2 words should explain everything. And maybe they did, because I saw Jerry's face pressed against the diner window, white as a sheet, his mouth hanging open. "And you just saved my daughter's life, so yes, you're coming with us." The man with blue eyes, his grip was gentle but absolutely firm, guided me toward one of the SUVs. I looked back at the diner, at Jerry and the few customers who were all staring now, their faces a mixture of shock and fear and something that looked almost like pity. "My things," I heard myself say stupidly. "My purse is inside. We'll get you whatever you need." Marco Salvatore was already moving toward the Mercedes, his daughter secured in his arms. "Get her in the car, Alessandro. Make sure she's warm." Alessandro, the blue-eyed man, nodded once and opened the SUV's door. The interior was all black leather, and the smell of expensive cologne and gun oil. I could see a weapon holstered under his jacket as he helped me inside, and my brain finally caught up with what was happening. I was getting into a car with armed men who worked for someone named Marco Salvatore, a name that made my manager look like he'd seen a ghost. Men who moved like soldiers and spoke in codes, and probably did things that would make me sick if I knew the details. But that little girl, Julia, she was so small, so cold, and her father's face when he'd seen her. The door closed behind me, sealing me in warmth and leather, and the point of no return. Another man slid into the driver's seat, and Alessandro took the passenger side, his hand resting casually near his weapon. The Mercedes was already pulling out of the parking lot, and we followed, the third SUV taking up the rear. "Where are we going?" My voice sounded small, foreign. "Private hospital," Alessandro said without turning around. His English was perfect, barely accented. "Mr. Salvatore has arrangements." Of course he did. Men like that always had arrangements. We drove in silence through rain-slicked streets, the city passing by in blurs of light and shadow. I pressed my face against the window, watching familiar landmarks become unfamiliar in the darkness. We were heading toward the north side, where the buildings got taller, and the cars got more expensive, and people like me didn't exist except to serve coffee and clean floors. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably Jerry, probably firing me. I didn't check it. My hands were still shaking, and I couldn't tell if it was from cold, or fear, or the adrenaline that was starting to crash through my system. "You did good," Alessandro said suddenly, and I jumped. He was watching me in the rearview mirror, his cold eyes slightly less cold, calling him. Not many people would have thought of that. "I didn't think," I admitted. "I just reacted." "Sometimes that's better." He paused, then added, "He won't forget this. Mr. Salvatore doesn't forget debts." That sounded like it should be reassuring, but somehow it wasn't. It sounded like a promise and a threat wrapped together, impossible to separate. The hospital appeared out of the rain like a fortress, all glass and steel and security cameras that probably cost more than my yearly salary. But we didn't go to the main entrance. Instead, we circled around to a side gate where armed guards in suits waved us through without hesitation. They knew this car. They knew these men. This was routine. We descended into an underground parking garage that was cleaner than most people's homes, our tires barely whispering against the polished concrete. The Mercedes was already parked, its doors open, and I could see Marco Salvatore striding toward an elevator with his daughter still in his arms. A man in a white coat, Dr. Russo, I assumed, was waiting with a gurney and a team of nurses. Alessandro opened my door. "Come on, he'll want you there." "Why?" The question burst out of me. "I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress who made a phone call." He looked at me for a long moment, something almost like sympathy crossing his face. "You're the person who saved his daughter's life. That makes you everything." I didn't understand what he meant until we got inside. The elevator opened directly into a private medical suite that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. Cream-colored walls, expensive art, floor so polished I could see my reflection. A drowned rat in a stained uniform, completely out of place. Nurses moved with quiet efficiency, their shoes making no sound. And I could hear Marco's voice through an open doorway, speaking rapid Italian that sounded like orders and prayers mixed together. Alessandro guided me to a small waiting room where a fire crackled in an actual fireplace. A woman appeared almost immediately, older, kind-faced, wearing a designer suit, and draped a blanket around my shoulders. "You're freezing, povera ragazza," she said, her accent thick and warm. "Come, sit by the fire. I'll get you something hot to drink." I sat because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. The warmth from the fire was painful against my frozen skin, making me gasp. The woman returned with tea in a delicate china cup, and I wrapped my hands around it, feeling life slowly creep back into my fingers. Through the open doorway, I could see Marco standing beside the gurney where they'd laid Julia. His hand was on her small one, his head bowed, and even from here I could see his shoulders shaking. Dr. Russo was talking to him quietly, gesturing, explaining things I couldn't hear. Nurses moved around them like a ballet, hooking up IVs, checking vitals, wrapping the little girl in heated blankets. "She'll be all right," the kind woman said, following my gaze. "Thanks to you. Dio ti benedica. God bless you." "I just made a phone call," I whispered. "You made the right phone call," she patted my shoulder. "That takes courage. Or foolishness. Sometimes they're the same thing." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just sipped my tea and watched the fire, and tried not to think about what I'd gotten myself into. Tried not to think about the guns under jackets and the private hospitals, and the way everyone moved around Marco Salvatore like he was royalty and danger combined. Tried not to think about those dark eyes finding mine across a cheap diner, or the way my name would sound in that accented voice, because I had a feeling I was about to find out. The door to Giulia's room closed, and Marco Salvatore emerged. His shirt was soaked, his hair disheveled, and there was something wild in his eyes that made my breath catch. He looked around the waiting room until he found me, and then he was crossing the space in 3 long strides. I stood up automatically, the blanket falling from my shoulders, my body responding to the command in his presence even though he hadn't said a word. He stopped inches from me, close enough that I could smell the rain still clinging to him, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes catching the firelight. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "What's your name?" His voice was rough, scraped raw. "Emma," I breathed. "Emma Carter." He repeated it slowly, like he was tasting each syllable. "Emma." Then his hand came up. I flinched, I couldn't help it, but he just placed it on my shoulder. His touch surprisingly gentle for someone so dangerous. "My daughter is alive because of you. Because you saw her when no one else did. Because you called me instead of waiting for authorities who would have asked questions and wasted time she didn't have. Anyone would have... No. The word was absolute. They wouldn't have. Most people would have looked away, would have assumed she belonged to someone else, would have called 911 and let the system handle it. You didn't. You acted. You saved her." His hand moved from my shoulder to my face, his thumb brushing my cheek, and I realized I was crying. I hadn't even noticed. "I owe you a debt," he said softly, and something in those words sounded like a vow. "And I always pay my debts, Emma Carter. Always." I should have been afraid, should have pulled away from his touch, from the intensity in his eyes, from the promise in his words that sounded like it came with chains attached. But all I could think about was that little girl's blue lips, and the way this dangerous man had fallen to his knees in the rain for his daughter, and I wondered what kind of prison I'd just walked into. 3 days. That's how long I stayed in Marco Salvatore's world before I understood that leaving might not be an option. The first night, they gave me a room in what I learned was Marco's penthouse, a sprawling apartment that occupied the entire top floor of a building in the most expensive part of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering skyline, and the furniture probably cost more than I'd earn in my entire lifetime. The bedroom they put me in was bigger than my whole apartment, with a bed so soft I sank into it like a cloud, and a bathroom with heated marble floors. "Just for tonight," Alessandro had said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Until we're sure Giulia is stable. Mr. Salvatore wants you close." I should have argued. Should have insisted on going home, but I was exhausted, still shivering despite the warm clothes they'd given me, expensive cashmere that felt like sin against my skin, and some part of me wanted to know that the little girl was okay. Just one night, I told myself. Then I'd go back to my life. Except the next morning, I woke to find new clothes laid out on the chair beside my bed. Not just any clothes. Designer labels I'd only seen in magazine spreads. Perfectly sized to fit me. A note in sharp, masculine handwriting. "Stay, please. MS." That please felt more dangerous than any demand. I found Giulia in a converted bedroom down the hall that had been transformed into a private recovery room. Medical equipment hummed softly, but they'd tried to make it less clinical. Stuffed animals on the windowsill, soft pink blankets, a mobile hanging above the bed that cast dancing shadows on the ceiling. She was awake, those dark eyes, so like her father's, tracking my movement as I entered. "Hi," I said softly, approaching slowly, like she was a wild animal that might spook. "I'm Emma. Do you remember me?" She didn't respond, just stared, her small hands clutching a worn stuffed rabbit that looked out of place among all the expensive things. Dr. Russo appeared in the doorway, his kind face creased with concern. "She hasn't spoken since we found her. Selective mutism, triggered by trauma. It's not uncommon in cases like this." "Cases like what?" I asked, but he just shook his head. "That's not my story to tell. Marco found me an hour later, standing at the window in Julia's room while a nurse checked her vitals. I'd been watching the city below, thinking about the diner and Jerry and my tiny apartment, and wondering how my life had turned into something unrecognizable in the space of a single night. "She likes you," he said quietly, and I turned to find him in the doorway. He looked different in daylight, still dangerous, still powerful, but tired. The kind of tired that lived in bones and couldn't be fixed with sleep. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with scars, and what looked like the edge of a tattoo. No jacket, no armor. Almost human. "She hasn't said anything," I pointed out. "But she watches you. That's more than she's done with anyone else since—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Since her mother took her." The words hung in the air like gunsmoke. "Took her?" I repeated carefully. He moved into the room, his steps silent despite his size, and stood beside Julia's bed. His hand found her small one, his thumb brushing over her knuckles with infinite gentleness. "Her mother. My ex-wife. She's an addict. Pills, cocaine, whatever she can get. I've tried everything. Rehab, therapy, threats, bribes. Nothing works. 3 months ago, I got full custody. A week ago, she broke into the house while I was at a meeting and took Julia." His voice was flat, emotionless, but I could hear the rage underneath, could see it in the way his free hand clenched into a fist. "I've had every resource looking for her, every contact, every favor owed. And then my ex abandoned her in that parking lot because she'd rather get high than care for her own daughter." He looked at me then, and the rawness in his eyes made my chest tighten. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't called, if you'd waited even 10 more minutes." "But I was there," I said softly. "And she's okay. She's going to be okay. Because of you." He stepped closer, and I could smell coffee and expensive cologne, and something underneath that was just him. "You saved her, Emma, and now I need to know how to repay that debt. You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would." "Stop saying that." His hand caught my chin, tilting my face up to meet his eyes. His touch was firm but not painful, commanding but not cruel. "Stop diminishing what you did. You saw my daughter when she was invisible to everyone else. You acted when others would have hesitated. You chose to call me instead of involving authorities that would have asked questions and wasted time and possibly exposed her to more danger." His thumb brushed along my jaw, and I felt that touch everywhere, like electricity racing through my veins. "You saved her life, Emma Carter. And in my world, that means something. It means everything. I should have stepped back, should have put distance between us, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare into those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through me. "I need to go home," I whispered. "I have a job, a life. The diner fired you." He said it casually, but I felt the words like a punch to the gut. "Your manager called this morning, said you abandoned your shift and they're not taking you back." The room tilted slightly. That job, terrible as it was, paid my rent, kept me fed. Without it, "I'll find something else," I said, but my voice shook. "I always do, or you could stay here." His other hand came up, framing my face between his palms, and suddenly the world narrowed to just him, just this moment, just the way his touch made my skin burn. "Stay with Julia. Help her recover. She responds to you in a way she doesn't with anyone else. I'm not qualified. I'm not a nurse or a therapist or... You're someone who cares, someone who saw a child in trouble and helped without thinking about what you'd get in return. That's more valuable than any qualification." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "Stay, Emma. Let me take care of you while you help take care of her." Every instinct I had screamed that this was a trap, that accepting meant getting tangled in something I didn't understand, something dangerous and possibly deadly. That Marco Salvatore, whoever he really was, came with shadows and secrets, and a kind of darkness that would swallow me whole. But I thought about my empty apartment, and my overdue bills, and the way Julia's eyes had tracked my movements, like I was the only solid thing in her broken world. 1 week, I heard myself say. I'll stay for 1 week, help her adjust. Then I need to figure out my life. Something flickered in his eyes, triumph, relief, something darker I couldn't name. 1 week, he agreed. But the way he said it sounded like a lie. Like he had no intention of letting me leave. The days blurred together in a haze of luxury and captivity. Because that's what it was, I realized slowly. A beautiful, comfortable prison. Alessandro and the other guards. I learned their names. Luca, Dante, Marco were always there. Not obviously, not threateningly, but present. Watching the doors, the windows, the elevator. No one came up without clearance. No one left without permission. I was safe, protected, cared for, trapped. I spent my mornings with Julia. We colored together, the little girl's hand moving slowly across paper while I talked about nothing, the weather, the birds outside the window, stories I made up about brave princesses and magical rabbits. She never responded verbally, but sometimes her lips would twitch in what might have been a smile, and once she placed her small hand on top of mine and left it there for 3 whole minutes. Progress, Dr. Russo said. Healing. Marco was there for every evening, no matter what meetings he'd had or how late he'd been out. He'd sit on the edge of Julia's bed and read to her in Italian, his voice soft and musical. And sometimes I'd find myself standing in the doorway just listening, not understanding the words, but feeling the love in them, the desperation and hope, and fierce protectiveness. On the 4th night, he found me on the balcony at midnight. I'd been unable to sleep, too aware of the city sprawling below, and the fact that I was 30 floors up with no way down except through guards who answered to a man I barely knew. Can't sleep? He appeared beside me like smoke, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He offered me one, and I took it because refusing felt more dangerous than accepting. It's quiet, I said. Too quiet. I'm used to sirens and people shouting and the couple upstairs fighting at 2 a.m. He smiled slightly, leaning against the railing beside me. Close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cool night air. You miss your old life. I miss knowing where I stand. I took a sip of wine. Expensive, smooth, tasting like cherries and something I couldn't name. There. I was just a waitress. Nobody important. Nobody dangerous. Here, I don't know what I am. You're the woman who saved my daughter. He turned to face me fully, and the city lights cast shadows across his face that made him look like something from a Renaissance painting. Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. You're the woman I owe everything to, the woman I think about constantly. The woman I want to keep safe from a world that would destroy her. My breath caught. You don't even know me. I know enough. His hand came up, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, and the gesture was so intimate it made my heart stutter. I know you work yourself to exhaustion for barely enough to survive. I know you put a child's safety before your own without hesitation. I know you're kind and brave and so fucking beautiful it hurts to look at you. Marco, I know this scares you, he continued, his voice dropping to something that was almost a whisper. I know what I am, what my world is. I know you should run from me as fast as you can. But I also know that when I look at you, I see something I haven't seen in years. Hope, light, something worth protecting. His thumb traced along my cheekbone, and I felt tears forming even though I didn't know why I was crying. Stay, he whispered. Not for a week. Stay, let me take care of you. Let me show you what it means to be cherished instead of invisible. Let me give you a life where you don't have to struggle and scrape and survive on scraps. That sounds like a cage, I said, but my voice had no strength behind it. It's only a cage if you want to leave. His forehead touched mine, and I could feel his breath against my lips. And I don't think you do. Not really. I think you're tired of fighting alone. I think you want someone to see you, really see you, the way I do." He was right, and that terrified me more than anything else. Because some part of me, the part that was so tired of being invisible, of struggling, of wondering where my next meal would come from, wanted exactly what he was offering, wanted to sink into the luxury and safety, and let someone else carry the weight for once. Wanted him, even though I knew it was dangerous. "I'm not a good man, Emma," he said against my skin. "I've done things that would make you sick. Hurt people. Destroyed lives. But for you, for my daughter, I would burn the world down and stand in the ashes, smiling." It should have horrified me. Instead, it made something dark and needy twist in my stomach. "1 month," I whispered. "Let me stay for 1 month. Help Julia. Figure out what this is." His smile was slow and dangerous and full of promise. 1 month, he agreed, and then his lips brushed against mine. Barely a kiss, more like a vow. And I tasted expensive wine and danger and the death of my old life. When I pulled back, I saw Julia standing in the doorway, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. She was watching us with those dark, knowing eyes, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw her smile. A real smile, small and shy and beautiful. And I realized I'd just agreed to stay in a cage lined with silk and gold, and a man whose touch felt like fire. The question was whether I'd ever want to leave. The month passed like a dream, or maybe a nightmare disguised as a fantasy. Julia began speaking in the 3rd week. Not full sentences, just small words whispered like prayers. Emma. Papa. Rabbit. Each one felt like a miracle, and I watched Marco's face transform every time his daughter's voice broke the silence. He'd pull her into his arms and press his face into her hair, and sometimes I'd see his shoulders shake in a way that told me he was crying, even though he'd never let anyone see his tears. I became part of their routine without realizing it was happening. Morning breakfast together at the long marble table, Julia sitting between us with her rabbit. Afternoons in the playroom that had materialized seemingly overnight, filled with toys and books and art supplies that cost more than most people's cars. Evenings when Marco would come home, sometimes early, sometimes late, sometimes with blood on his cuffs that he thought I didn't notice, and we'd have dinner like we were a family. Like this was normal. Like I wasn't living in a penthouse with a man who commanded fear with a glance, and whose guards carried enough weapons to start a small war. My old life faded like a photograph left too long in the sun. My apartment, I'd called my landlord to break the lease, and Marco had sent men to pack up my things. Everything I owned fit into 4 boxes that now sat in a closet in my bedroom. 4 boxes to represent 23 years of existence. It should have made me sad, but mostly I just felt numb. The clothes appeared gradually. At first, I thought they were temporary. Borrowed things to get me through. But the labels were cut out, sized perfectly to fit me, and they kept coming. Dresses in silk and cashmere, jeans that probably cost more than my old monthly rent, lingerie that made me blush just looking at it. When I tried to protest, Marco just smiled that dangerous smile and said, "Let me dress you in things worthy of your beauty." It felt like being a doll, a cherished, expensive doll. Alessandro became my constant shadow. Wherever I went, even just to the building's gym or the rooftop garden, he was there. Professional, polite, but always watching. Once I tried to leave the building alone, just to walk to the coffee shop I'd seen on the corner. He'd materialized in front of the elevator like smoke, his hand gentle but firm on my arm. "Not without escort, Miss Carter. Mr. Salvatore's orders." "I'm not a prisoner," I'd said, but we both knew it was a lie. "No," Alessandro had agreed quietly. "You're something far more valuable. You're protected." The word tasted like chains, but it was the nights that truly trapped me. Marco had a way of finding me when the penthouse went quiet, on the balcony, in the library, once in the kitchen at 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. He'd appear with wine or coffee or nothing at all, and we'd talk. About everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in Sicily, about his father's legacy, about the weight of responsibility and the price of power. He never explicitly said what he did, but I wasn't stupid. The guards, the deference, the way people's faces went white when they heard his name. Marco Salvatore was a crime lord. Mafia. The kind of man my mother would have crossed the street to avoid. And yet, when he looked at me, I felt seen in a way I never had before. He touched me constantly, small, possessive gestures that felt like brands, his hand on my lower back when we walked, his fingers brushing my hair from my face, his palm cupping my cheek when he said goodnight. Never pushing for more, but the promise of it hung between us like smoke, thick and suffocating and intoxicating. "You're mine to protect," he'd said one night, his thumb tracing my bottom lip. "Mine to care for. Mine to keep safe from everything that could hurt you." "I'm not yours," I'd whispered. But it sounded like a question. Not yet. His smile had been pure predator. "But you will be." The truth arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of a blonde woman in a designer suit and murder in her eyes. I was in the playroom with Julia, building a castle out of blocks, when I heard shouting from the main room. Alessandro's voice, sharp with warning, and then a woman's scream, wordless and full of rage. "Stay here," I told Julia, but she grabbed my hand with surprising strength, her eyes wide with fear. So I pulled her behind me and moved toward the doorway, my heart hammering. The woman was stunning in the way that only money and good genetics could create. Long blonde hair, perfect makeup, a dress that probably cost 5 figures, but her face was twisted with fury and something else, desperation, as she struggled against Luca's hold. "Let me go. She's my daughter. You can't keep me from my daughter." Marco stood in the center of the room like a pillar of ice, his hands in his pockets, his face expressionless, but I could see the rage in the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "You lost the right to call her your daughter when you abandoned her in the rain to die," he said, his voice so cold it made my breath catch. "I didn't abandon her. I left her somewhere safe, somewhere she'd be found, in a parking lot, at midnight, in a storm, while you were high out of your mind." Each word was a bullet. "The doctors found cocaine and oxycodone in your system when the police picked you up." Again, Isabella, always again. So this was Julia's mother, Marco's ex-wife, the woman who'd stolen her own daughter and left her to freeze. Isabella's eyes found me and Julia in the doorway, and something ugly crossed her beautiful face. "Who the fuck is that? You replaced me? Already moved your whore into our home with our daughter?" "This was never your home," Marco said quietly, but there was death in his voice. "And Emma is worth 1,000 of you. She saved Julia's life while you tried to end it." "I didn't try to—" Isabella's voice broke, and suddenly she was crying, mascara running down her cheeks. "I love her. I love my baby. I made a mistake. I was confused and scared and—" "You were high." Marco moved closer to her, and I saw Luca tense, ready to intervene. "You've been high for 2 years. Through every broken promise, every missed visitation, every time you chose drugs over your own child. And now you expect sympathy?" "I expect to see my daughter." Isabella lunged toward us, and I automatically pulled Julia behind me more fully. The little girl made a small, frightened sound. The first sound of fear I'd heard from her, and buried her face in my legs. Marco's expression transformed into something terrible. "Get her out," he said to Luca. "Now, and make sure she understands. If she comes near this building again, if she tries to contact Julia, if she so much as speaks my daughter's name—" "You'll what?" Isabella spat. "Kill me? Go ahead, Marco. Put me out of my misery. At least then I won't have to watch you play house with some cheap—" The slap came from nowhere, and I flinched at the sound. But it wasn't Marco who'd hit her. It was Alessandro, his face cold and professional. "You will show respect in Mr. Salvatore's home," he said quietly, "or you will be removed by force." Isabella laughed, the sound brittle and broken. "Respect? From the man who took everything from me? Who stole my daughter and my life and—" "You destroyed your own life," Marco interrupted. "With every pill, every line, every choice you made that put your addiction before your family. Don't blame me for the consequences of your actions." Luca was already dragging her toward the elevator, her struggles weakening as whatever drug cocktail she was on started to fade. At the elevator doors, she turned back one last time. "She'll hate you," Isabella said, her voice thick with tears. "Eventually, Julia will hate you for keeping her from me, and your little pet. She gestured at me with contempt. She'll figure out what you really are and run screaming. The elevator doors closed on her face, and silence fell like a hammer. Marco stood motionless for a long moment, his back to us, his hands clenched into fists. I could see him shaking with suppressed rage, could practically feel the violence radiating off him in waves. Then Julia pulled away from me and ran to her father, throwing her small arms around his legs. "Don't let her take me," she whispered, the most words she'd spoken since the night in the rain. "Please, Papa, don't let her take me away from you and Emma." Marco dropped to his knees and pulled his daughter into his arms, his face buried in her hair. "Never," he said roughly. "Never, piccola mia. You're safe. You're home. No one will ever take you from me again." Over Julia's head, his eyes found mine. Dark and intense and full of something that looked like need and possession and a kind of desperate hunger. "Thank you," he mouthed silently, "for protecting her." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Because I'd just realized something terrifying. I hadn't protected Julia out of duty or obligation. I'd protected her because she felt like mine. Because in the space of 3 weeks, this little girl had wrapped herself around my heart so completely that the thought of anyone hurting her made me want to commit violence. And Marco, he'd wrapped himself around something deeper. Something I didn't want to name, because naming it would make it real. That night, after Julia finally fell asleep clutching both her rabbit and my hand, Marco found me on the balcony. He looked exhausted, older somehow, the weight of the confrontation showing in the lines around his eyes. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly, coming to stand beside me at the railing. "Is she always like that?" "When she's using, yes, which is always." He rubbed his face tiredly. "I tried to help her, paid for the best rehabs, the best therapists, but you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. And Julia has full legal protection from her mother. Isabella's parental rights were terminated after she kidnapped Julia. She's not allowed within 500 feet of her." His jaw tightened, though she clearly doesn't care about court orders. I thought about the fear in Julia's eyes, the way she'd clung to me for protection. She's terrified of her, with good reason. Isabella wasn't always violent, but toward the end, there were incidents. A slap here, rough handling there, things I didn't see until it was almost too late. His voice broke slightly. "I failed to protect my daughter from her own mother. But you're protecting her now." I turned to face him, and suddenly we were inches apart, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his eyes catch the city lights. "You got her away. Got her safe. That's what matters. And you." His hand came up to cup my face, his touch achingly gentle. "You protect her too. She feels safe with you. Happy. She calls you by name, Emma. Do you understand what that means? You've become essential to her healing." "Marco, I need to know if you'll stay." The words came out urgent, almost desperate. "Not for a month, not as a temporary arrangement. Stay. Be part of our lives. Help me raise her. Let me—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "Let me give you everything you deserve. Safety, comfort, a home, a family." "I'm not her mother," I whispered. "No. You're better. You're the person who chose her, who saved her, who loves her without the obligation of blood." His thumb brushed away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "And I'm asking you to choose us. Choose me. Let me make you mine in every way that matters." It should have been romantic, should have felt like a declaration of love. But all I could hear was that word. Mine. Like I was something to be owned, possessed, kept. "What if I say no?" I asked. "What if I want to leave?" His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something dark and dangerous and absolutely uncompromising. "Then I'll let you go," he said softly. "But we both know you won't, because you love her too. And you—" His lips brushed my temple. "You feel this too, this pull between us, this need." He was right, and I hated him for it. Hated that he could see through me so clearly, could understand that I'd already fallen for his daughter, and was dangerously close to falling for him. "Say yes," he whispered against my skin. Say you'll stay. Say you're mine. And God help me, I did. Yes. The word sealed my fate like a contract signed in blood. 6 months later, I stood in Marco's office and realized I'd become someone I didn't recognize. The woman in the reflection of his floor-to-ceiling windows wore a dress that cost more than my old car. Her hair professionally styled, her skin glowing from spa treatments I'd stopped feeling guilty about. She looked expensive, polished, like she belonged in this world of marble and leather and quiet power. She looked like Marco Salvatore's woman, and she was a prisoner who'd learned to love her cage. It started subtly, the way all prisons do. A suggestion that I shouldn't go to certain parts of the city because they weren't safe. A gentle insistence that Alessandro accompany me everywhere because Marco worried. A new phone that he'd set up himself, though I noticed later that it had tracking software I hadn't installed. For your protection, he'd said when I confronted him, so I always know you're safe. Safe. That word had become a knife that cut both ways. The penthouse had become my entire world. I hadn't seen my old friends in months. They'd stopped calling after I'd canceled plans one too many times, always with the same excuse. Marco needed me. Julia needed me. It wasn't a good time. My art supplies sat untouched in a corner because Marco had hired a professional tutor for Julia, and somehow I'd become her primary caregiver. Not that I minded. I loved that little girl with a fierceness that sometimes scared me. But I'd stopped being Emma Carter, struggling waitress with dreams of art school. I'd become Emma, Marco's beautiful doll, kept and dressed and controlled with such gentleness, I almost didn't notice the chains. Almost. The breaking point came on a Wednesday evening. I'd asked, not for the first time, about taking an art class at a community center I'd found. Something just for me, a few hours a week to remember who I used to be. No. Marco didn't even look up from the documents he was reviewing, his pen moving across paper with sharp, decisive strokes. What do you mean, no? I crossed my arms, feeling anger rise in my chest, an emotion I'd learned to suppress around him. It's just a class. 3 hours on Saturday mornings. Alessandro can come with me if you're worried about safety. I said no, Emma. His tone was gentle, but absolutely final. That neighborhood isn't secure. The building has inadequate exits. Too many variables I can't control. You mean too many variables where I'm not under your direct supervision? Finally, he looked up, and I saw something flicker in his dark eyes. Surprise, maybe, that I'd pushed back. This is for your protection. This is about control. The words burst out of me. 6 months of frustration and suffocation finding voice. You control where I go, who I see, what I do. I can't leave this building without an armed escort. I can't make a phone call without wondering if you're listening. I can't even take a fucking art class without your permission. Marco set down his pen slowly, deliberately, and stood. He moved around the desk with that predatory grace that used to make my pulse race with desire. Now it just made me want to run. You think I control you? His voice was still soft, still gentle, and that made it worse. Everything I do is to keep you safe, to give you a life without struggle or pain. You have everything you could want, except freedom. I backed away as he approached, my hands shaking. Except choices, except the ability to be a person instead of a possession. He stopped moving, and for a moment something that looked like pain crossed his face. You're not a possession. You're... yours? I laughed bitterly. That's what you always say, isn't it? You're mine, Emma. Mine to protect, mine to care for, mine to keep. But what you really mean is mine to control, mine to cage, mine to own. Is it so terrible? His voice dropped to something almost pleading. To be cherished, protected, to never have to worry about money or safety or... Yes. The word came out as a shout, and I saw Alessandro shift in the doorway, his hand moving toward his weapon. I lowered my voice, but the intensity remained. Yes, Marco, it's terrible. Because I'm not living, I'm just existing in a beautiful prison. And you're my jailer who thinks he's my savior. Silence fell like a bomb, and I watched emotions war across his face. Anger, hurt, confusion, and underneath it all, that possessive obsession that had seemed romantic 6 months ago and now felt suffocating. I love you, he said finally, and the words should have been beautiful. Everything I do because I love you. You and Julia. You're my family. My world. And I will do whatever it takes to keep my world safe, even if it destroys me, I whispered. Even if keeping me safe means killing who I am? You don't understand. Then make me understand. I moved closer, desperate for him to see me, really see me. Make me understand why loving someone means controlling them, why protecting someone means imprisoning them. Because right now, all I understand is that I've traded one kind of poverty for another. I used to be poor in money. Now I'm poor in freedom, and I don't know which is worse. Marco reached for me, his hands framing my face with that achingly gentle touch that had become his weapon. When I found Julia that night, when I thought I'd lost her forever, I made a vow. Never again. Never would I fail to protect the people I love. Never would I let anything happen to them, because I wasn't vigilant enough, wasn't careful enough, wasn't controlling enough of the variables. I'm not Julia, I said softly. I'm not a child who needs constant supervision. I'm a woman who needs to breathe. You're the woman I love. His forehead touched mine, and I could feel him trembling. The woman who saved my daughter, the woman who made my house a home. The woman I can't lose. Don't you see, Emma? I can't lose you. The thought of something happening to you because I wasn't careful enough, it would destroy me. And there it was, the truth under all the control and possession. Not cruelty, but fear, terror even. The fear of a man who'd already lost too much and couldn't survive losing more. So you'll cage me instead? I pulled back to look into his eyes. You'll keep me so safe that I suffocate? That's not love, Marco. That's obsession. Then I'm obsessed. He said it without shame, without hesitation, completely, utterly obsessed with keeping you safe and by my side. And I won't apologize for that. I can't live like this. The words hurt coming out, like I was tearing out part of my soul. I can't be this person, this beautiful doll you keep on a shelf. I need more. I need freedom. I need to be myself, even if myself makes mistakes or takes risks or gets hurt. His hands tightened on my face. Gets taken. Gets killed. Because that's what happens in my world, Emma. People I care about become targets, weapons used against me. And you, God, you'd be the perfect weapon because you're the only thing besides Julia that could bring me to my knees. I saw tears in his eyes and it shocked me. Marco Salvatore, crime lord and terror of the city, crying because the thought of losing me broke something in him. Then let me go, I whispered. If loving me means destroying me, let me go. I can't. The words were anguished. I've tried. Every day I tell myself I should send you away, set you free, let you have the life you deserve. But then I see you with Julia, or you smile at me over breakfast, or I catch your scent in the hallway. And I know I'm too selfish, too broken, too fucking obsessed to let you go. We stood there, foreheads touching, both of us crying, both of us caught in a trap of our own making. And then I heard a small voice from the doorway. Don't leave. Julia stood there in her pajamas, her rabbit clutched to her chest, her dark eyes, so like her father's, swimming with tears. Please don't leave, Emma. Please. I need you. My heart shattered. I dropped to my knees and she ran to me, throwing her arms around my neck with desperate strength. I love you, she whispered into my hair. You're my mama. Not the scary lady who hurt me. You. You're my real mama. Please don't go away. Over her head I met Marco's eyes. He looked utterly destroyed, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from grabbing us both and never letting go. And I realized that I had a choice to make. The choice that had been building for 6 months. I could leave. Demand my freedom. Walk away from the golden cage. Reclaim my life and my identity. Julia would be hurt. But she was young. She'd heal. She had her father and therapists and all the resources money could buy. Or I could stay. But not as a prisoner. Not as a possession. As a partner. Okay, I said softly, and I felt both Marco and Julia tense. Okay, I'll stay. But things change, starting now. I stood, keeping Julia in my arms, and faced Marco with all the strength I had left. I stay. But I'm not your prisoner. I'm your partner. That means I get a say in my life, where I go, what I do, who I see. Alessandro can come with me if it makes you feel better. But I get to leave this building. I get to take that art class. I get to exist as a person, not just as Julia's caregiver and your beautiful doll. Marco started to speak, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished. You need therapy. Real therapy, with someone who specializes in trauma and control issues. Because this, I gestured between us, this isn't healthy love. It's obsession born from fear, and it will destroy us both if you don't deal with it. His jaw clenched, but he nodded slowly. And Julia needs to go to school. Not homeschooling, not private tutors, actual school with other children. She needs to learn how to exist in the world, how to be strong and independent. We can't protect her from everything, Marco. We can only teach her how to protect herself. The security risks, he started, can be managed. You're Marco fucking Salvatore. You can make anything safe if you want to badly enough. I moved closer, Julia still in my arms, but you have to want to. You have to want more for us than just survival in a beautiful cage. He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched him war with himself. The need to control versus the need to keep me happy. The fear of losing us versus the fear of destroying us. Finally, he moved. 3 long strides, and he was there, his arms wrapping around both me and Julia, holding us so tight I could barely breathe. Okay, he whispered into my hair. Okay, we do it your way. Therapy, school, freedom. Whatever you need. But you stay. Promise me you stay. I promise, I said, and felt the last of my resistance crumble. I promise I stay. I love you, you controlling, obsessive, impossible man. I love you and I'll stay, but we do this together. As partners, as equals. As family, Julia added, her small voice muffled against my shoulder. As family? Marco agreed, and I felt his tears on my neck. The changes came slowly, but they came. Marco started therapy the following week. Individual sessions with a specialist who worked with trauma and PTSD. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and arguments, and nights when his need to control threatened to overwhelm everything else. But he tried. Every day, he tried. I took the art class. Alessandro came with me, blending into the background with professional ease, but I was there, creating again, remembering what it felt like to be Emma instead of just Marco's woman or Julia's surrogate mother. Julia started at a small, exclusive school with security measures that would make Fort Knox jealous. The first day, Marco was barely functional with worry, but she came home excited, chattering about her new friend Sophia and the art project they'd done. And slowly, painfully, Marco learned to let her grow. We weren't perfect. Marco still tracked my phone. I'd learned to accept it as his version of compromise. I still had guards, still lived in his penthouse, still existed in his world of shadows and danger. But now it felt like a choice instead of a prison. Like I was choosing him, choosing this life, instead of being trapped in it. 6 months after that confrontation in his office, Marco asked me to marry him, not with a dramatic proposal or a public display, but quietly, in the dark of our bedroom, his voice rough with emotion. Make it official, he whispered against my skin. Be my wife. Let me give you my name and all the protection that comes with it. Let me love you openly, completely, for the rest of our lives. I thought about the girl I used to be, the invisible waitress with nothing but dreams and debt. I thought about the woman I'd become, stronger, more confident, learning to navigate a world of danger and luxury with equal grace. And I thought about Julia, asleep down the hall with her rabbit, calling me Mama without hesitation now. Yes, I said. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding was small, just family and Marco's closest associates, held in the penthouse with the city sprawling below us like a carpet of stars. Julia was the flower girl, beaming in her white dress, and when Marco slid the ring onto my finger, a diamond so large it was almost obscene, I saw tears in his eyes. Mine, he whispered as he kissed me. And for once, the word didn't feel like a cage, it felt like a promise. 2 years later, I stood in the same spot on the balcony where Marco had first asked me to stay, but everything had changed. I was pregnant, 4 months along, barely showing but glowing according to everyone who saw me. My art was being shown in a small gallery downtown, paintings of light and shadow, and the beauty found in darkness. Julia was thriving in school, happy and confident, and surrounded by friends whose parents had no idea her father was one of the most dangerous men in the city. And Marco, he'd kept his promise. He still worried, still had moments where the need to control threatened to overwhelm him. But he'd learned to channel it differently, to protect without imprisoning, to love without suffocating. I felt his arms wrap around me from behind, his hands settling on my barely there bump with infinite gentleness. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his accent curling around the words like smoke. "About that night," I said. "When I called you about Julia, when I made the biggest decision of my life without even knowing it, regrets?" I turned in his arms to face him, this beautiful, dangerous, impossible man who'd stolen my freedom and given me a kingdom in return. "Not a single one," I said, and meant it. Because I'd learned that sometimes cages aren't made of bars, but of love and fear and the desperate need to protect what matters most. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to fight for your freedom within them, those cages can become homes. Marco kissed me as the city lights blazed below us, Julia's laughter echoing from inside where she was showing Alessandro her latest school project. And I thought about the girl I used to be, invisible and struggling and alone. She would have been terrified of this life. But the woman I'd become, Marco's wife, Julia's mother, artist and survivor and fighter, she'd found something better than freedom in its simplest form. She'd found freedom within love, found strength in partnership, found home in the most unexpected place, in the arms of a monster who'd learned to be a man. For her, for their daughter, for the family they'd built from ashes and rain, and a single phone call that changed everything. And as Marco's hand tightened on mine, his other hand protective over our unborn child, I smiled into the darkness and whispered the truth I'd learned through pain and love and transformation. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The city glittered below us like scattered diamonds, full of possibility and danger and life, and for the first time since that rain-soaked night in a cheap diner, I felt like I could finally breathe, not because I'd escaped the cage, but because I'd learned that sometimes the cage becomes home when it's built by the right hands, and Marco's hands, scarred and dangerous and achingly gentle, had built me a home I'd never want to